Hey, good morning, afternoon, or evening. It's a Tuesday, or whenever you are listening to this podcast. We are continuing our journey through Scripture. My name is Philip Thomas, pastor of Journey here in Elgin, and glad you've joined us today. We went through Genesis chapter 41 yesterday, on last Thursday, and now we're going to be picking up in Genesis chapter 42, and we're going to go through 44. And then we're gonna then we'll hit the end after that. So we're only gonna hit a couple of chapters here. But one thing that I find as I go through this, there's always little things that I wish I would have said, or because there's so much, right? But for us to get through the whole Bible, we can't hit every little point. But there's I miss something. I'm like, I think that's an important aspect to this story, because the story of Joseph, especially here, is a vital story for us to understand. It gives such a wonderful picture of God's interaction with us, of choosing to be faithful to God, of overcoming unfairness, of overcoming difficult circumstances. And so at the very end of chapter 41, where we left off, if you remember, Joseph has been betrayed by his brothers, been sold into slavery. Jacob, his father, thinks that he's dead. He ends up in Potiphar's house, rises in the ranks there, does really well. And then Potiphar's wife falsely accuses him of harassment. Then he gets thrown in prison. Then he rises in the ranks there, does really well, helps two of Pharaoh's workers by interpreting their dreams. They forget him, right? So he's in jail for another 3 years, but he continues to work and continues to be faithful to God. And now finally, he interprets Pharaoh's dream, and now he is released, and he is put in charge of handling the affairs, dealing with the famine that is to come. And so he's gone through all of that. And he has two children. And in chapter 41, he has, and this is in verse 51, it says, Joseph called the name of his firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has called me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And I think that's really interesting. So why would Joseph have named his children that? It's obviously speaking about him, right? And that first one, that God has helped him to forget all his toil and all my father's house, right? Now, it doesn't mean he's forgotten about it. It means that he has overcome, that he has moved past that, right? That all of that injustice that he suffered at the hands of his brothers, at any point, he had an excuse to give up on life, right? Like, he could have said, this is ridiculous, and he could have just given up. He could have turned his back on God. He could have quit trying. He had every reason to do that because of how unfairly he was treated. But he did not allow himself to be defined by his past. Rather, he focused on where he was and what he could do moving forward. And I think that's a vital thing for us to understand. That doesn't minimize what many people have gone through in their past. Lots of people have gone through horrific things in their past and have experienced injustice, have experienced abuse, all of those things. And that is very real and is very powerful. But that does not define who you are. God will help us to move forward and to put our focus on where we are going rather than our focus behind us. And I think that's very important for us to understand that God does want us to do that. He doesn't want us to get stuck and to get caught in where we were, but rather look where we're going. And Joseph starts to focus on the opportunities he now has, opportunities he never would have thought or never would have dreamed about. You know, whenever he was with his brothers growing up, he never would have dreamed that he would be in a foreign land, imprisoned, and then rising to a powerful position in that land. That was never something he expected. But now he recognized, okay, this is where I am. I'm going to accept God's blessings here, and we're going to move forward. And so we see that, and I wanted to bring that up because it's just very important to this whole story of Joseph. Because he has been able to put that behind him and move forward, things continue to unfold. And so the famine hits just as Joseph had predicted. God had given them the wisdom to interpret Pharaoh's dream. The famine hits, and then there in chapter 42, it hits the people of Canaan. And Jacob and Joseph's brothers are sitting around. I love what it says. It says, Jacob says to his sons, "Why do you look at one another? Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. So go down there and buy some for us so that we may not die." And it's funny, just the picture there is that they're all just sitting around talking about, well, what do we do? What do we do? And they're just sitting there. And Jacob's like, get off your rear end and go get something, right? And so Joseph's brothers make the travel to Egypt. They leave behind Benjamin, the youngest. You know, we see the flaws in this family. Jacob's favorite is Joseph and Benjamin because they were the sons that Rachel had, who was the wife that he had intended, and remember how all of that devolved. So Joseph and Benjamin were clearly his favorites. He's lost Joseph, so now his favoritism has gone to Benjamin. And so he doesn't want Benjamin to go because he's scared that he's going to lose Benjamin. And so Joseph's brothers, they go and they meet Joseph. And you can just imagine the scene, and it makes sense. Some people say, well, why did they not recognize Joseph? Well, they wouldn't be looking for Joseph, one. Two, it's been over 30 years by now. Right? So look at a picture from yourself 30 years ago. You may not recognize yourself either. But also Joseph would be an Egyptian looking. He would be wearing Egyptian clothing. He would have been looking like an Egyptian. He wasn't even speaking Hebrew. He was going through an interpreter at this time. But he does recognize them. And he sees who they are. And I think it's interesting, Joseph's reaction, and put yourself in that position. He could have done anything, right? He could have just immediately had them jailed and imprisoned with no reason. He could have given them the reason and said, pay back, it's time, right? Or he could have just opened his arms and given them lots of hugs and said, oh, it's so great to see you being reunited with my family. This is wonderful. He didn't do that. I believe that he was excited to see them. He's kind of like, wow, what is God doing here? Here all of a sudden I am reunited with my family in a sense. But he wanted to check and see if his brothers had changed. He is going to now put them through a test. He wants to see have they learned anything from what they did to me. And I think that's a wise thing to do. He desires to have a relationship with them, as we will see, but he also wants to make sure, okay, where are they now? What are they the same brothers who threw me in a well and sold me, or have they learned from that? And so we have him starting to interact with them, accuses them of being spies. It says that he's going to have them imprisoned. He wants them to bring Benjamin back so that he can see Benjamin. In verse 18, he says this. He says, they've been in prison now for 3 days. And Joseph says to them on the third day, do this and live. So he's asking them to go back and get Benjamin. And if they're going to come back, they have to bring back Benjamin, and he's going to keep one of the brothers there. It says, do this and live, for I fear God. Another way to interpret that is, I am a God-fearing man. If you are honest man, let one of your brothers be confined to a prison house, but you go and carry the grain to back home. And that line is so important, and I think it's a basic principle that we need to learn from Scripture, is that we need to be God-fearing people. You need to be a God-fearing person, that you have a respect for God, but there is a healthy fear of God, knowing that God is holy, that God is the creator of all things, right? But that, yes, he does love us, and he cares for us, and he interacts in our life, but there should be a healthy respect and a fear for God. That is vital for our understanding of our place in creation. Right? It is God, and then it is us, right? We are lower than him, and there is a response of respect and fear to that, and we need to strive to be God-fearing people, just as Joseph was. So Joseph talks to them and gives them this opportunity to go back, but one of the brothers has to stay, and he's hearing them discuss this in Hebrew because they think that he can't understand them. And that's when Reuben says, "Did I not speak to you," talking to the brothers, saying, "Do not sin against the boy," but you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. And what Joseph is realizing is that they have struggled with this decision. Like they've realized, okay, what we did there was not right. And they didn't think there was any way that they could make up for it, but they have acknowledged that. And so Joseph does let them go back. He actually puts the money back in their bags of grain, and this freaks them out because they're like, oh, great. Now it's going to seem like we somehow swindled the Egyptians to get our bags of grain. And I think this is all, again, part of Joseph's test. How are they going to handle this? How are they going to handle this adversity? And maybe there's a little bit of fun that Joseph's having. It's like, I can put a little bit of stress on them. They've given me some stress as well. But so he sends them back. They go back to Canaan, and they tell Jacob what needs to happen. So Simeon, Joseph's brother, is now in Egypt. The rest are back with Jacob, and they say, okay, we need to go get Simeon, but to do it, we have to bring Benjamin. It's interesting. Jacob actually is like, no, we're not going to do that. He doesn't want to make that decision. And so they begin eating the food, going through. Of course, it's still a famine. They're talking about this. You can imagine the conversations. Do we go back? Because now they know that they also didn't technically pay for that food. So if they go back, they're all in danger. But that's the only way they're going to be getting Simeon. And so Jacob is struggling. He's like, here, I've already lost Joseph. Now you want me the chance of, now I've lost Simeon. Every time that y'all go somewhere, you lose a brother. And so he's struggling. But Reuben assures him, that everything's going to be okay. They finally gets to the point where they are desperate. They need food. So they have to go back to Egypt, and they have to bring Benjamin with them. So they get back, and Joseph welcomes them in and invites them to come to a feast. And what's interesting is they immediately have a guilty conscience. They start worrying, oh, is he setting us up? Is he going to have us all killed? They are really struggling with this. And they have this guilty conscience that you see there in chapter 43 in verses 16 and 17. They're wondering, why is he asking us to come to this meal? What's going to happen? But they get there. They have this wonderful meal together. It's interesting in verse 26 that they are all there. His brothers, what do whenever he enters in? They bow down to him. Which, if you remember, what started all of this was Joseph's dreams that he told to his brothers that one day they would bow down before him. Now, his brothers didn't take that kindly, and were like, who's this punk kid to say that we're going to bow down to him? Well, guess what? They're now bowing down before Joseph. And they have a meal together. It's interesting. One thing that kind of jumped out to me talks about, just the sinful nature in all cultures. Down in verse 32 of chapter 43, it says, so they set him a place by himself, and themselves the Egyptians who ate with them by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. Right? They were not going to associate with another culture. They were not going to associate with another people group. They could not even break bread with them together. That sinfulness of racism, of superiority, of racial supremacy, that is something that has been going on for a long time because it is a sin problem. It's a human nature problem. and the Egyptians revealed that, and it's a little bit of foreshadowing as to what's going to be coming in the years to come as well. And so we get there. They have this meal. Joseph really kind of shows his favoritism to his brother Benjamin, which makes sense as his only full brother. It's also the only brother that wasn't there to sell him over into to slavery, and so they have a kind of a back and forth. It's interesting what one of the things Joseph does is he gives them all their grain, but then he puts a cup in Benjamin's sack and has the people accuse Benjamin of stealing the cup. And again, I think he's kind of wanting to see how these brothers are going to handle this. And the brothers are just distraught and will do anything to protect Benjamin. And this starts changing Joseph's perspective of his brothers, that he's starting to recognize, okay, they have learned something. And then Judah, you see Judah interceding for Benjamin and just goes all out saying, listen, you cannot take Benjamin. We have promised our father that he would be safe, and just goes on and offers himself up and is in a selfless act saying, take me, do anything else that you have to, but do not take Benjamin. And that brings us to the end of chapter 44. I want us to stop there today. Next Thursday, on Thursday, will be chapter 45 through the end of Genesis. So we're going to wrap up the story of Joseph and go all the way through Joseph's death at the end of Genesis. So encourage you to read chapters 45 through 51 of Genesis for next Thursday. All right, we'll see you then.